Chapter 5. Ritual Free. Free things cost the most. Zumingrui silently mumbled and decided that he would not purchase any additional services, whatever they were. He would firmly refuse them all. If you are really that capable, try divining that I transmigrated here. With this in mind, Zumingrui followed behind the woman whose face was painted red and yellow, stooping low to enter the low tent. The tent's interior was extremely dark, illuminated only by several beams of light that managed to seep inside. A table covered with paper cards could be made out faintly in the low illumination. The woman with the sharp, pointy hat was not affected by this at all. Her long black dress glided as though it was moving over water while she went around to the table. She sat on the opposite side and lighted a candle. The dim yellow light flickered, causing the inside of the tent to appear bright and dark at the same time. It instantly added a much more mysterious feel to the atmosphere. Zumingrui sat down quietly, his gaze sweeping over the tarot cards on the table where he discovered familiar cards like the Magician, the Emperor, the Hanged Man, and Temperance, etc. Could Roselle have been a senior? I wonder if he was also a fellow countryman of mine, Zumingrui mumbled to himself subconsciously. Before he could finish looking at the opened cards on the table, the woman who claimed to have accurate divinations had already reached out her hands to gather all of the cards together. She stacked them into a deck and pushed it in front of him. Shuffle the cards first and cut the deck, the circus fortune teller said in a muted voice. Me? Shuffle? Zumingrui asked reflexively. The yellow and red paint on the fortune teller's face squirmed together as she revealed a slight smile, saying, Of course, everyone's destiny can only be unraveled by themselves. I only serve as a reader of it. Zumingrui immediately questioned her warily. This reading does not require additional fees, right? As a keyboard folklorist, I've already seen too many of such tricks. The fortune teller was visibly taken aback before finally saying muffledly, It's free. Zumingrui, relieved, stuffed the revolver further back into his pockets. Thereafter, he calmly reached out his two hands to shuffle and cut the deck skillfully. It's done. He placed the already shuffled tarot cards in the middle of the table. The fortune teller clasped the cards with both her hands and carefully looked at cards for a while. Then, she suddenly opened her mouth and said, I'm sorry, I forgot to ask. But what would you like to ask about? Back when he was wooing his first love, Zumingrui had also done research on tarot cards, he asked unhesitatingly, past, present, and future. This was a type of divination, as part of tarot card interpretation. 3 cards, when opened sequentially, symbolized one's past, present, and future. The fortune teller nodded first, then curled her lips to reveal a smile and said, Then please reshuffle the deck. You can only truly get the cards you want if you know what you would like to ask about. Were you fooling me just now? Do you have to be this petty? Didn't I only ask a few times if this would be a free service? Zumingrui's cheeks twitched a little. He took a deep breath and took the tarot deck back to reshuffle and cut it. There won't be any problems this time, right? He placed the already cut deck back onto the table. No problem. The fortune teller reached out her fingers and picked a card from the top of the deck. Then she placed it on the left side of Zumingrui. Her voice was going lower and lower as she spoke. This card symbolizes your past. This card symbolizes your present. The fortune teller placed the second card right in front of Zumingrui. Then she picked the third card and put it on the right side of Zumingrui. This card symbolizes the future. All right, which card would you like to see first? The fortune teller raised her head up after completing her placement of the cards and gazed deeply at Zumingrui with her grayish-blue eyes. I'll have a look at the present first, Zumingrui said after giving it some thought. The fortune teller nodded slowly and flipped over the tarot card that was directly in front of Zumingrui. A colorfully dressed character was depicted on this card, wearing ragged headgear with a stick over his shoulder. There was a bindle hanging on the end of the stick, and a puppy was following behind him. It was numbered 0. The fool, the fortune teller lightly read out the name of the card with her grayish-blue eyes affixed on Zumingrui. The fool? The 0 card of tarot? A start? A fresh beginning with all kinds of possibilities? Zumingrui was not even considered an amateur enthusiast of tarot, so he could only make a rough interpretation based on his own impressions of tarot. Just as the fortune teller was about to say something, the cloth curtains of the tent was suddenly lifted open. The ray of sunlight that shone in was so blinding that it caused the back-facing Zumingrui to instinctively narrow his eyes. Why are you impersonating me again? It's my job to handle the divination for people, a woman's voice growled angrily. Return to your post quickly. You must remember that you're just an animal trainer. An animal trainer? Zumingrui's eyes had already adapted to the light by now. He saw a similar-looking woman who was also wearing a sharp, pointy hat and a black dress, with her face painted in red and yellow as well. The only difference was that she was taller and had a slimmer physique. The woman who was seating in front of him immediately stood up and said disgruntledly, "Don't mind this. It's just that I like doing this. But I have to say, my divination and interpretation can be really accurate sometimes. I'm serious." She spoke and lifted up her dress to go around from the side of the table before quickly trotting away from the tent. "Sir, would you like me to interpret your cards for you?" The real fortune teller looked at Zumingrui and asked with a smile. Zumingrui's lips twitched and asked her sincerely, "Is it free?" "No," the real fortune teller answered. "Then, forget it." Zumingrui pulled his hands back and put them into his pockets. He clutched his revolver and money before stooping again to exit the tent. Damn, he actually got an animal trainer to be his fortune teller. Was an animal trainer who didn't want to be a fortune teller not a good clown? Zumingru very quickly put this matter behind him. He spent 7 pence at the lettuce and meats market for a pound of not so great mutton. Then, he also bought some tender broad beans, cabbage, onions, potatoes, and other items. Together with the bread that he bought earlier, he spent a total of 25 copper pennies, which converted to 2 soldi and 1 pence. There's really not enough to go around for spending. Poor Benson. Not only had Zumingrui spent the 2 notes that he had brought with him, but it was also necessary for him to top it up with the 1 penny he had in his pocket. He just sighed and did not think further about it as he hurried back home. With the staple food, he could now carry out the luck enhancement ritual. After the second-floor tenants gradually left, Zumingrui was still in no hurry to carry out the ritual. Instead, he translated the blessings stem from the immortal Lord of Heaven and Earth and related phrases into the ancient Fasak language, as well as the Loan language. He was intending to try the ritual again the next day in those local languages, if the original incantation did not take effect. After all, he had to take into consideration the differences between the 2 worlds. In Rome, do as the Romans do. As for translating it into an ancient ritual prayer that used the dedicated Hermes language, Zumingrui had a difficult time completing it due to his lack of vocabulary. After readying everything, he finally took out the 4 loaves of rye bread. He placed one in the corner where the coal stove was originally, one at the bottom inner side of the dress mirror, one at the top of the cupboard where 2 walls met, and one at the right side of the study table where miscellaneous items were kept. With a deep breath, Zumingrui came to the center of the room and spent a few minutes to calm himself. Then, he took a solemn step forward and went in a counterclockwise direction in the shape of a square. When he took the first step, he chanted in a low whisper, "Blessings stem from the immortal Lord of Heaven and Earth." The second step, he sincerely chanted, "Blessings stem from the Sky Lord of Heaven and Earth." The third step, Zumingrui breathed out a whisper, "Blessings stem from the exalted Tharch of Heaven and Earth." At the fourth step, he spat out a foul breath and meditated in concentration. "Blessings stem from the celestial worthy of heaven and earth." When he returned back to the original spot, Zumingrui closed his eyes and waited in his place for an outcome. He had some anticipation in him, some unease, some hope, and some fear. Could he make it back? Was there going to be any effect? Could there be some unexpected situation? The unknown in front of him was tainted with the crimson light of hope. Zumingrui's thoughts were swirling in his head and was finding it difficult to quell it. It was at this time that he suddenly felt the surrounding air seem to stop, becoming thick and mysterious. Immediately after, a low whisper could be heard beside his ears that sounded at times real, at times sharp, at times imaginary, at times alluring, at times maniacal, and at times crazy. He clearly did not understand the murmuring that went on. But Zumingrui still couldn't help himself from wanting to listen to it and distinguish what it was saying. His head was in pain again. It was so painful that it felt like someone had stuck a steel drill rod into it. Zumingrui only felt like his head was going to explode. His thoughts were filled with a psychedelic of colors. He knew that something was wrong and tried to open his eyes. However, he wasn't even able to complete such a simple action. His entire body was getting tighter and tighter, and it felt like he could just break apart at any time. At this time, a self-mocking thought came up in Zumingrui's mind. If you didn't seek death, He wouldn't die. He could no longer bear with it. Just as his mind was going to break, the murmuring of voices faded away and his surroundings became very quiet. The mood was an erratic one. It was not only the mood. Zumingrui felt his own body going through the same sensations as well. He tried once more to open his eyes, an extremely easy task this time. A gray fog appeared over his eyes, haziness, vague and endless. What's with this situation? Zumingrui suddenly looked around him and then lowered his head down to discover that he was floating at the edge of an endless fog. The fog was flowing like water and was dotted with a lot of crimson stars. Some of them were enormous, while others were tiny. There was a sense of them being hidden in the deep depths, while others floated over the surface of this water-like fog. Looking at the seemingly holographic sight, Zumingrui reached out his right hand in a half-confused, half-exploring manner to try to touch the crimson stars that was seemingly floating on the surface. He was trying to find a way to leave this place. When his hand touched the surface of that star, a watermark suddenly appeared from within his body and agitated the stars into a crimson burst. It looked like a dreamlike burning of flames. Zumingrui got a fright from it. He retracted his right hand in a panic, but accidentally touched yet another crimson star. As a result, this star burst with splendid light as well. In turn, Zumingrui felt his mind empty and his spirit dissipated. In the Lone Kingdom's capital, Bakland, inside a luxurious-looking villa at the Royal District, Audrey Hall sat in front of a dresser. The markings on it were antiquated, and there was a cracked bronze mirror on the surface. Mirror, mirror, awaken. In the name of the Hall family, I command you to awaken. She switched between many different sayings, but there was no reaction from the mirror at all. After more than 10 minutes, she finally chose to give up and pouted her lips in grievance. She said in a soft murmur, "Father was indeed lying to me. He always tells me that this mirror was the treasure of the Roman Empire's Dark Emperor, and that it is an extraordinary item." Her voice trailed off. The bronze mirror, which rested on the dresser, suddenly glowed with a crimson light that shrouded her completely. In the Sonia Sea, a 3-masted sailboat that looked like an obvious relic was navigating through a storm. Alger Wilson stood on deck, his body undulating with the currents at sea, maintaining his balance easily. He wore a robe embroidered with lightning patterns, and in his hand was a quirky-shaped glass bottle. Bubbles billowed inside the bottle at times, frost turned into snow at times, and signs of gusting wind could be seen at times. "We're still short on the ghost shark's blood," Alger murmured. Then at this moment, a crimson burst appeared in the space between the glass bottle and the surface of his palm. In an instant, it enveloped the surroundings as well. In the fog of gray mist, Audrey Hall regained her sight. She started reckoning the situation in a state of horror and confusion when she noticed the blurry image of a man on the opposite side of her doing the same as well. Immediately after, the both of them discovered another mystery person standing not far from them, who was shrouded in a gray mist. The mysterious person was none other than Zumingrui. He was similarly dumbfounded. "Sir, where is this?" Audrey and Alger were startled at first, falling silent in the process. Then, they immediately started speaking in unison. "What are you planning on doing?" Chapter 6. Beyonder not only did they speak the same Loan language, they also shared the same grim, intense vibes. "Where am I? What do I plan to do here? I would like to know too." Calming himself down, Zumingrui silently repeated the questions posed by the two. What left the deepest impression on him were neither the sentences formed by words nor the meanings behind them, but the display of bewilderment, vigilance, panic, and reverence by the couple. For some baffling reason, two people had been mysteriously dragged into this world surrounded by gray fog. As the perpetrator, Zumingrui, was already feeling abnormally dumbfounded and startled, let alone the couple who was pulled into this mess completely passively. For them, such events and encounters might already be beyond their imaginations, right? Momentarily, Zumingrui thought of two options. The first option was feigning victimhood to hide his true identity, and in turn gain a considerable amount of... He could then take a wait and see approach and take advantage of his circumstances where necessary. The other option was to maintain his mysterious identity in the eyes of the couple. He could then effect the subsequent development while gleaning valuable information from them. Without the luxury of time to deliberate over the situation, he grasped hold of the thought that flashed across his mind. He made an immediate decision to try out the second idea. Exploit the psychological state of the others to gain the greatest advantage for himself. After a few seconds of silence in the fog, Zumingrui chuckled. With a low but not heavy tone, he calmly spoke as though he was replying to the polite greetings from the visitors. An attempt? An attempt? An attempt? Audrey Hall looked at the mysterious guy veiled in the grayish-white fog, and the only thought was that whatever was happening was absurd, funny, horrifying, and weird. She was at the dressing table inside her bedroom only moments ago, but just by turning around, she had come into this place that was filled with gray fog. How inconceivable! Audrey took a breath, revealing an impeccable, courteous smile. She asked in a somewhat perturbed way, "Sir, is the attempt over? Might you permit our return?" Alger Wilson also had the intentions to probe Zumingrui in a similar fashion, but his rich experience made him statelier. He held back his impulse and only took on the role of a silent onlooker. Zumingrui looked at the questioner. Looking through the hazy mist, he could roughly see the silhouette of the person in question. It was a tall girl with smooth blonde hair, but her exact countenance could not be seen clearly. He did not rush to reply the girl's question, but turned around to look at the man. He had messy dark blue hair, as well as a medium stature that was not considered stout. Zumingrui suddenly realized something. Once he became stronger, or had a deeper understanding of the foggy world, perhaps it was possible for him to see through the fog and discern the girl and the man. In this situation, they are the visitors, and I'm the master. After changing his mindset, Zumingrui instantly noticed details that he had neglected earlier on. The girl with a melodious voice and the mature, withdrawn man both looked considerably incorporeal. Tainted by a faint crimson red, they resembled a projected image of the two crimson-red stars beyond the gray fog. This projection was based on the connection between the crimson red and himself, an intangible connection that only he himself could realistically grasp hold of. The projection would disappear once the connection was cut, and the couple would then return. Zumingrui nodded mildly and looked at the blonde, chuckling. Of course, if you make a formal request, you can return this very moment. When she did not identify any ill intention from his tone, Audrey heaved a sigh of relief. She believed that since a gentleman who was capable of such miraculous things had given his word, he would definitely abide by it stringently. With her mind somewhat mollified, she surprisingly was in no hurry to request her leave. She rolled her virid eyes left and right, which sparkled with an abnormal radiance. She said in an anxious, anticipative, and tempted manner, "This is such a wonderful experience. Yes, I've always been hoping that something like this would happen. I mean, I like mysteries and supernatural miracles. No, my point is, what I mean is that, sir, what can I do to become a beyonder?" She got more excited as she spoke, so much so she was fumbling over her words. The dream that sprouted in her as a result of listening to thrilling fantasies as told by her elders finally saw the possibility of being materialized. However, with just a few words, she had already forgotten all her previous fears and horrors. "Good question. I would also like to know the answer," Zumingrui complained inwardly. He started to ponder on an answer to the question to maintain his unfathomable image. At the same time, he felt that it was quite unbecoming of him to talk while standing. Shouldn't he be in a palace, sitting at the head of a long table, and on a mysterious high-backed chair engraved with ancient patterns, while silently observing his visitors? As soon as this thought surfaced, the gray fog started to churn, giving both Audrey and Alger a shock. In an instant, they saw a number of towering stone pillars around them. Above them was a vast dome that encapsulated them. This entire edifice looked magnificent, grand, and lofty, just like a legendary palace for giants. Directly under the dome where the gray fog gathered, a long bronze table appeared with 10 high-backed chairs on either side, in asymmetrical arrangement. The back of each chair dazzled and shone faintly with crimson red, drawing the outlines of weird constellations that differed from reality. Audrey and Alger sat face to face, sitting next to the seat of honor. The girl looked to her sides and could not help but mumble, "How fascinating." "It is certainly fascinating." Zumingrui extended his right hand and caressed the edge of the bronze table a little while maintaining an unperturbed expression. Alger inspected the surroundings, and after a few seconds of silence, he suddenly opened his mouth and answered Audrey's question in place of Zumingrui. "Are you alone? If you want to become a beyonder, join the churches of either the Evernight Goddess, the Lord of Storms, Or the god of steam and machinery? The majority of us will not meet a beyonder our entire life. This has caused churches, and even some clergies within some of the biggest churches, to suspect the same. While this is the case, I am certain to tell you that beyonders still exist in courts, tribunals, and execution agencies. They are still fighting against the dangers that grow in the dark, only that their numbers are much fewer as compared to before and during the early days of the Iron Age. Zumingrui listened attentively, but he tried his best to present himself as paying little attention to Alger's words, much like how young kids listen to stories. Relying on Klein's fragmented general knowledge of history, Zumingrui knew clearly that the Iron Age referred to the current epoch, which was the fifth epoch that began 1349 years ago. Audrey silently listened to Alger finish his sentence before sighing. Mister, I know all about what you just said. I even know more than that, including the Nighthawks, the mandated Punisher, and the machinery hive mind, but I don't want to lose my freedom. Alger gave a low-sounding laugh and said vaguely, You can't become a Beyonder without sacrifices. If you don't consider joining churches and accepting their given challenges, you can only seek the royal families and the few nobles with family histories of more than 1,000 years. If not, you can rely on your luck to search for clandestine evil organizations. Audrey puffed her cheeks subconsciously and looked around in a fluster. After confirming that both the mysterious man and Audrey did not notice her tick, she pressed, Are there no other solutions? Alger sank into silence. About half a minute later, he turned around to look at the mysterious man who was watching the two of them in silence. Realizing that Zumingrui had no plans to make any comment, he looked back at Audrey and said with deliberation, I have 2 sets of Sequence 9 potion formulas. Sequence 9? Zumingrui muttered to himself. Really? Which 2 sets? Audrey clearly knew what the Sequence 9 potion formulas meant. Alger leaned back slightly and replied unhurriedly. As you know, humanity can only depend on potions to become real Beyonders, while the names of potions come from the blasphemy slate. After constant translations into Jotun 1, Elvish, Ancient and Modern Hermes, and Ancient Physac, they have undergone changes to match the day and age of that era. The essence is not in their names, but whether they portray the core characteristics of the potions. I have a Sequence 9 potion named Sailor. It enables you to have excellent balancing capabilities. Even if you were on a boat in a rainstorm, you will be able to walk about freely as though you were on land. You will also gain immense strength and illusory scales under your skin. They will enable you to swim like a fish and be difficult to catch. You will move agilely underwater, just like marine animals. Even without any equipment, you will be able to easily submerge underwater for at least 10 minutes. Sounds great. The Keepers of the Seas from the Lord of Storms? It was called by that name in the past. Alger did not pause and continued. The second set of Sequence 9 potions is called Spectator, although I am not sure what it was called in the past. This set of potions enables you to have an exceptionally sharp mind with acute observational abilities. I believe you can understand by what spectators means from watching operas and plays. Just like an audience, spectators judge the actors in the secular world, catching a glimpse of the real thoughts of them through their emotions, conduct, and mantras. At this point, Alger emphasized, you must remember, regardless of whether you are at an extravagant banquet or a crowded street, spectators can only be spectators forever. Audrey's eyes shone as she listened and spoke after a long while. Why? All right, this is a follow-up question. I think I have fallen in love with this feeling of being a spectator. How can I get this potion's formula? What can I use to trade with you for it? Alger looked like he was already prepared as he said in a deep voice, the blood of ghost sharks, at least 100 milliliters of it. Audrey nodded her head excitedly, but subsequently asked worriedly, if I can get it, how do I hand it to you? How do I hand it to you? How can you promise me that you can give the potion's formula to me in return for the ghost shark's blood, as well as the authenticity of the formula? Alger said calmly. I'll give you an adrad. I'll mail the formula to you, or tell you directly here, once I receive the blood of the ghost shark. As for promises, I think that both you and I can feel rest assured under the witness of the mysterious Sir. As he said this, he swept his eyes toward Zumingrui, who was sitting up straight at the seat of honor. Sir, the fact that you brought us here shows that you have tremendous strength, unimaginable to us. Neither one of us would dare violate a promise with you as witness. That's right. Audrey's eyes sparkled and agreed with excitement. From her perspective, the mysterious gentleman who had unimaginable abilities was definitely an authoritative witness. How could I or the guy opposite me dare trick him? Audrey half turned her body and looked at Zumingrui earnestly. Sir, please be the witness of our trades. At that moment, she then realized that she was all too impolite, having forgotten all along to ask a particular question. She asked hurriedly, Sir, how should we address you? Alger nodded slightly and echoed the same question in a serious manner. Sir, how should we address you? Zumingrui was taken aback. He gently rapped his fingers on the bronze table. The contents of the earlier divination flashed across his mind suddenly. He leaned back, withdrew his right hand, and crossed his 10 fingers, placing them below his chin. He gave the duo a faint smile. You can address me as... Upon saying this, he paused for a moment. He said amiably and calmly, the Fool. Chapter 7. Call sign, you can address me as the Fool. The simple answer soon emanated through the grand hall and dissipated into the fog. However, the voice kept resonating in Audrey's and Alger's hearts, stirring up one ripple after another. They never expected such a designation, but they felt that he was deserving of it. The designation perfectly embodied his image as someone mysterious, powerful, and bizarre. After a few seconds of silence, Audrey stood up, held up her skirt slightly, and bent her knees, curtsying to Zumingrui. Honorable Mr. Fool, would you please permit me to take the liberty of requesting you to be the witness of our trade? It's nothing. Zumingrui's mind whirred as he answered in a way that matched his status. It's our honor, Mr. R. Oh, fool. Alger stood up as well. He bent his back slightly with his right palm over his chest. Zumingrui lowered his right palm and smiled. Continue, the both of you. Alger nodded and sat back down before looking at Audrey. If you can obtain the ghost shark's blood, get someone to send it to the Warrior Sea Bar at Pelican Street, in the White Rose Borough of Pritz Harbor, and tell the boss, Williams, that it's what the captain wants. Once I acknowledge receipt, will you be giving me an address to mail the potion formula to? Or do you want me to tell it to you, here directly? Audrey thought for a moment before saying with a smile, I will choose the more secure method. Let's do it here, although it's a test of my memory. Since Mr. Fool had agreed to bear witness for the trade, it also represented that there would be a similar gathering the next time. With this in mind, she suddenly turned her head as she looked at Zumingrui with sparkling eyes. With a tone of interest, she suggested, Mr. Fool, would you mind making a few more attempts like this? Alger listened to her suggestion calmly. He was tempted by the suggestion as well. He hurriedly echoed, Mr. Fool, don't you find such gatherings interesting? Although your powers exceed our imaginations, there has to be certain domains that you don't understand or excel in. The person across me is obviously a young lady of lofty stature. I also have my unique set of experiences, insights, mediums, and resources. Perhaps there will come a day when both of us can help you complete something trivial that might be inconvenient for you. From his point of view, the fact that he had been pulled into this space without any warning or any means to resist meant that the mysterious Mr. Fool was in control. Participating in the gatherings was not necessarily something he could refuse. Therefore, it was better to reap the benefits of this encounter as much as he could to make up for his passive and disadvantaged state. The trio at the long table had different backgrounds, resources, information channels, and comprehension of the mystical domain. If they interacted and enjoyed some limited cooperation, they could produce unpredictable and immeasurable effects. The resource trade that had just been negotiated was one example. Another example would be if he wished to kill someone. He could easily request the gathering's members, who did not appear to be related to him both on the surface and in reality, for help. He could perfectly misdirect any investigators. A young lady of lofty stature? Was my behavior and accent that obvious? Audrey stared blankly, mouth slightly agape, but she soon jolted back to her senses and nodded her head without any hesitation. Mr. Fool, I think it's a very good suggestion. As long as this gathering becomes regular, you can totally leave certain things that are inconvenient for you to us. Of course, it has to be something within our capacities. From the moment he heard the suggestion, Zumingrui was already weighing the pros and cons. More gatherings definitely allowed him to gain more knowledge of the secrets of the Beyonders or other mysteries, a boon for his transmigration back. For example, it was likely that the potion formula would appear at the next gathering because of the spectator. Similarly, the information he gained was bound to be helpful for his present life. However, More gatherings meant it was easier to expose himself. Indeed, regardless of the world, there is no such thing as a free lunch. Lumingru extended his right hand again as he rapped the side of the long table with his finger gently. Considering the fact that he was in control of the gathering's summoning and dismissal, any threat of exposure was within the confines of his control. The pros clearly exceeded the cons, so Zhu Mingrui rapidly made a decision. He stopped his rapping as he smiled at the anticipative and perturbed gazes of the duo. I'm a person who likes a fair and equal exchange. Your help will not go unrewarded. Every Monday at 3 in the afternoon, try your best to be alone. After I make a few more attempts and figure out certain things, perhaps you can apply for a leave of absence ahead of time. You will no longer need to worry about being in inappropriate situations. This was a form of agreement to Alger's and Audrey's suggestions. Audrey had just turned 17. Having been taken care of her entire life, she had the character of a young girl. Therefore, she could not help but clench her fist and gradually pump it in front of her chest when she heard the fool's reply. Without waiting for Alger to say a word, Audrey said in excitement, her eyes glowing, "Then, shall we give ourselves call signs? After all, we can't use our real names for conversation. Although I might not be able to deceive Mr. Fool regarding my true identity, the person opposite me poses some danger. I must not let him know who I am." "Good idea," answered Zhu Mingrui in a simple and relaxed manner. Audrey's mind immediately began whirring as she aired her thoughts as they came to her. "You are Mr. Fool, which is derived from tarot cards. Then, as a fixed, long-term, and secretive gathering, we should be uniform in our designations. Yes, I'll also choose one from the tarot cards." Her tone slowly turned joyous. "I've decided. My designation shall be Justice. It was one of the 22 major arcana tarot cards. What about you, mister?" Audrey cheekily smiled at her partner sitting across her. Alger frowned slightly before relaxing it immediately. The Hanged Man. It was another major arcana card. "All right, then we can be considered as the founding members of the Tarot Club?" Audrey was the first to blurt it out happily, only to look fearfully at the fog, concealed Zhu Mingrui. "Will that be all right, Mr. Fool?" Zhu Mingrui shook his head in amusement. "You can decide on such trivial matters by yourselves." "Thank you." Audrey was clearly thrilled. Following that, she looked at Alger. Mr. Hanged Man, can you repeat the address again once more? I'm afraid that my memories will fail me." "No problem." Alger was very pleased with Audrey's seriousness as he repeated the address once more. After repeating it to herself silently thrice, Audrey said again in excitement, "I heard that tarot cards were invented by Emperor Roselle as a game. In fact, doesn't it come equipped with the power to divine the future? No. Most of the time, divination stems from one's self. Everyone has something spiritual about themselves, allowing them to attune to the spiritual world and connect to information about themselves at an even higher level. However, ordinary folks are unable to notice this, much less be able to interpret the signs they receive. This information will present itself with the help of divination tools. Let me raise a simple example: dreams and dream interpreters." Alger took a glance at Zhu Mingrui and seeing no response from him, he refuted Audrey's claim. Tarot cards are, in fact, such a tool. It uses more symbolism and more logical elements to help us in conveniently and accurately interpreting the signs. Although Zhu Mingrui appeared indifferent, he was actually listening very carefully. It was only at this point that his empty mind slowly became heavy as his head began to feel a throbbing pain. Got it. Audrey nodded in agreement. Following that, she emphasized, "That's not what I meant. I'm not doubting the tarot cards, but I heard that Emperor Roselle had actually created another set of cards, secret and mysterious ones. They were paper cards, which symbolized a particular unknown power. There was a total of 22 cards that he completed. Later on in life, he referenced them to create the 22 major arcana tarot cards, which are used as a gaming tool. Was what I said correct?" She looked at Zhu Mingrui as though she was attempting to get an answer from the mysterious Mr. Awful. All Zhu Mingrui did was smile without saying a word. He cast his gaze at the Hanged Man as though he was putting him to the test. Alger subconsciously straightened his back and said in a deep voice, "That's right. It is said that Emperor Roselle had seen the blasphemy slate, and that set of paper cards contained the profound mysteries of the 22 paths of the divine." 22 paths of the divine. repeated Audrey with a longing tone. At that moment, Zumingrui's headache intensified. He felt that his invisible connection with the crimson stars and grayish-white fog was beginning to falter. "All right, that will be all for today's gathering," he said in a deep voice after making the decision immediately. "By your will." Alger bowed his head respectfully. "By your will." Audrey mimicked the hanged man. He still had many questions and thoughts. Thus, she was unwilling to have it end so soon. As Zumingrui severed the connection, he said with a smile, "Let us look forward to the next gathering." The stars brightened once more as the crimson light receded like water. Just as Audrey and Alger heard Mr. Fool's words, their figures turned into a blur as they phased away. In a second, the projection shattered as the gray fog restored its silence. As for Zumingrui, he felt himself turning heavy rapidly. His surroundings turned fleeting as his eyes met darkness, before changing into dazzling sunlight. He was still standing in the middle of his apartment. It was like a dream. What the heck was that foggy world? Who or what sort of power created the changes that just happened? Zumingrui sighed softly. He was completely puzzled as he walked towards the study desk, as though his legs were filled with lead. He picked up the pocket watch he placed outside to determine how much time had passed. Time flowed at the same pace. Zumingrui made a rough judgment. After putting down his pocket watch, he found himself unable to endure the splitting headache any further. He sat on the chair and lowered his head, using his left thumb and middle finger to massage his temples. After a long while, he suddenly let out a sigh and said in Mandarin, "From the looks of it, I won't be able to return anytime soon. Only the clueless could be fearless." After witnessing such a fascinating event and learning the situation regarding Beyonders and the mysterious world, Zumingrui no longer dared to rashly try the luck enhancement ritual using ancient Faizak or Lone language. Who knew what other kinds of situation would happen? Perhaps it would be more bizarre, horrifying, or even a living hell. At the very least, I should attempt only when I have a deep mastery of mysticism, thought Zumingrui helplessly. Thankfully, the so-called gathering could provide him with help. After another bout of silence, he muttered to himself with a tone of dismay, disappointment, agony, and grief. From this moment forth, I'm Klein. Klein tried his best to refocus his solutions and plans so as to purge the negative emotions in him. Perhaps he could learn the potion formula for Spectator from the side. The gathering that just happened sure is fascinating. People who reside in different places across the world can reduce hundreds of kilometers to just mere inches and discuss face to face while supplying each other's needs. Speaking of which, this does sound a little familiar. Klein was stunned for a few seconds before he burst out in laughter. Pressing against his temple, he jested under his breath. Wasn't that a social networking platform? Chapter 8. A new era, whoosh, howling wind accompanied a downpour. The three-mast sailboat was tossed around by the crests and troughs of the incoming waves, as if it was being toyed by a giant. The crimson glow in Alger Wilson's eyes faded. He found himself still remaining on the deck, and nothing appeared to have changed. Almost immediately, the quirky-shaped glass bottle in his palm shattered, and the frost within melted into the rain. In seconds, there were no longer any traces left that suggested the existence of the wondrous antique. A hexagonal crystal-like snowflake emerged on Alger's palm. It then faded rapidly until it was seemingly absorbed by the flesh, vanishing completely in the process. Alger nodded his head in a hardly noticeable manner, as if he was thinking about something. He remained still and silent for a full 5 minutes. He turned around and headed for the cabin. As he was about to enter, a man who wore a similar robe embroidered with lightning patterns emerged from inside. This man, who had soft blonde hair, paused and looked at Alger. He held his right fist to his chest and said, "May the storm be with you." Alger replied with the same words and gestures. There were no emotions on his rough face, which had a well-defined structure. Alger entered the cabin after the greeting and proceeded to the captain's cabin, situated at the far end of the corridor. Surprisingly, he did not encounter any sailors on the way. The whole place was as quiet as a graveyard. Behind the door to the captain's cabin, a soft brown carpet overlaid the floor. A bookshelf and a wine rack took the opposite side walls of the room. The books with their yellowish covers and wine bottles with their dark red color looked peculiar under the flickering candlelight. On the desk with the candle, there was a bottle of ink, a quill, a pair of black metallic telescope, and a sextant made of brass. Behind the desk sat a pale, middle-aged man wearing a captain's hat, which had a skull on it. As Alger approached him, he said menacingly, "I will not give in. I believe you can do it," Alger said calmly. So calm that it felt like he was commenting on the weather. "You?" The man seemed to be stunned by the unexpected answer. At this very moment, Alger leaned forward slightly and suddenly dashed across the room until they were only separated by the desk. "Ah," Alger tightened his shoulder and reached out his right hand to choke the man. Illusory fish scales appeared on the back of his hand as he crazily mustered more strength to choke the man, giving him no time to respond. Crack, amid the crisp cracking sound. The man's eyes widened as his body was lifted up. His legs twitched furiously before they soon became motionless. His pupils began to widen as he stared aimlessly. There was a stench from between his legs as his pants gradually turned moist. While lifting the man, Alger lowered his back and strode toward the wall. Bang! He used the man as a shield and smashed forward at the wall. His extremely muscular arm was monstrous. A hole cracked open in the wooden wall, and rain poured in, accompanied by the scent of the ocean. Alger flung the man out of the cabin, straight into the giant waves that resembled mountains. The wind continued to howl in the dark as almighty nature devoured everything. Alger took out a white handkerchief and wiped his right hand carefully before throwing it into the sea as well. He stepped back and waited patiently for company. In less than 10 seconds, the blond man from before rushed in and asked, "What happened?" "The captain has escaped," Alger answered in an annoyed manner as he panted. "I didn't know he still had some of his Beyonder powers." "Damn it," the blond man cursed softly. He went up to the opening and stared into the distance. However, nothing was visible except for the waves and the rain. "Forget it. He was just extra loot," the blond man said, waving his arm. "We will still be rewarded for finding this ghost ship from the Tudor era." Even if he was a keeper of the sea, he would not have hastily dived into the sea under this weather condition. "The captain will not be able to survive much longer if the storm continues," Alger said as he nodded in approval. The wooden wall was repairing itself at a discernible rate. He gazed at the wall and turned his head subconsciously towards the rudder and the sail. He was perfectly aware of what was going on behind all the wooden planks. The chief mate, the second mate, the crew, and the sailors were not present. There was no living person on board. Amidst all the emptiness, the rudder and the sail moved eerily by themselves. Alger again pictured the fool who was covered in grayish-white fog and sighed. He turned back and looked outside at the mighty waves and spoke as though in a reverie while filled with anticipation and awe. "A new era has begun. Empress Borough Backland, capital of the Lowen Kingdom." Audrey Hall pinched her cheeks in disbelief of her encounter a while ago. On the dressing table in front of her, the old bronze mirror had shattered into pieces. Audrey cast her gaze downwards and saw the swirling crimson on the back of her hand. It was like a tattoo depicting a star. The crimson gradually faded and disappeared into her skin. Only at this point in time was Audrey certain that it was not a dream. Her eyes twinkled as she grinned. She could not help but stand up before bending down to lift up the hem of her dress. She curtsied towards thin air and started dancing lively. It was the ancient elf dance, the most popular dance among royalty at the moment. She had a bright smile on her face as she moved about gracefully. Knock. Someone suddenly knocked at her bedroom door. "Who is it?" Audrey immediately stopped her dance and asked as she tidied her dress to look more elegant. "My lady, may I come in?" "You should start to prepare for the ceremony?" Audrey's maidservant asked from outside the door. Audrey looked into a mirror on the dressing table and quickly wiped the smile from her face, leaving only a tiny hint of a smile. She responded gently after she had ensured everything was presentable. "Come in." The doorknob turned, and Annie, her maidservant, pushed in. "Oh, it cracks," Annie said as she instantly saw the outcome of the old bronze mirror. Audrey blinked and said slowly, yes. Susie was here just now. I'm sure you know she likes to wreak havoc." Susie was a golden retriever that was not so much of a purebred. It was a gift given to her father, Count Hall, when he bought a foxhound. Nevertheless, Audrey adored it. "You should train it well," Annie said, as she picked up the pieces of the bronze mirror adeptly and with care, lest it hurt her mistress. As she finished tidying up, she asked Audrey with a smile, "Which dress do you want to put on?" Audrey thought for a while and answered, "I like the dress designed by Mrs. Guinea for my 17th birthday." "No, you can't wear the same dress twice to a formal ceremony, or others will gossip about and question the Hall family's financial ability, Annie said, shaking her head in disagreement. But I really like it, Audrey insisted in a gentle manner. You could wear it at home or when you attend an event that isn't so formal, Annie said firmly, suggesting that it was not negotiable. Then it will have to be the one with the lotus design along the sleeves given by Mr. Sadie's 2 days ago, Audrey said as she drew in a gasp inconspicuously, maintaining her sweet smile. You always have such a good taste, Annie said as she stepped back and shouted towards the door. The 6th dressing room! Ah, forget it! I shall fetch it myself. Maidservants began to work. The dress, accessories, footwear, hat, makeup, and hairstyle. Everything had to be taken care of. When it was almost ready, Count Hall appeared at the door wearing a dark brown waistcoat. He had a hat sharing the same color as his clothes and a nice mustache. His blue eyes were filled with joy, but his loosening muscles, widening waist, and wrinkles were obviously destroying his handsome youth. The brightest jewel of Backland? It is time for our departure, Count Hall said, knocking at the door twice. Father, stop calling me that, Audrey protested as she got up with the help of the maidservant. Well then, it's time to set off, my beautiful little princess, Count Hall said as he bent his left arm, signaling Audrey to hold his arm. Audrey shook her head slightly and said, That is for my mother, Mrs. Hall, the Countess. Then this side. Count Hall bent his right arm with a smile and said, This is for you, my greatest pride, the Royal Navy Base, Pritz Harbor, Oak Island. When Audrey took her father's arm and walked down the carriage, she was suddenly shocked by the juggernaut in front of her. In the military port not far away, there was a huge ship shimmering with metallic reflection. It did not have a sail, leaving only an observatory deck, 2 towering chimneys, and 2 turrets at the ends of the ship. It was so majestic and large that the fleet of sails nearby were like newborn dwarfs clustering around a giant. Holy Lord of Storms! Oh, my lord! An ironclad warship. Amidst the furore, Audrey was also shocked by this unprecedented miracle created by mankind. It was an ocean miracle that had never been seen before. It took a while for the aristocrats, ministers, and members of parliament to compose themselves. Then, a black spot on the sky started to grow in size until it occupied a third of the sky and entered everyone's view. The atmosphere suddenly became solemn. It was a gigantic flying machine with a beautiful streamlined design hovering in midair. The deep blue machine had airbags made of cotton, which were supported by alloy structures that were strong but light. The alloy structure's bottom had openings mounted with machine guns, projectile launchers, and muzzles. The exaggerated humming noise from the ignition steam engine and the tail blades produced a symphony that left everyone amazed. The king's family arrived on their airship, exuding a lofty and indisputable authority. 2 swords, each with a ruby crown at the handle, were pointing vertically down and reflected the sunlight on both sides of the cabin. They were the Sword of Judgment emblem, which symbolized the Augustus family and has been passed down from the previous epoch. Audrey was not yet 18, so she had not attended the introductory ceremony, which was an event led by the Empress that marked one's debut into the Backland social scene to announce her adult status. Therefore, she could not be nearer to the airship and had to remain silent at the back to watch the entire event. Nevertheless, it did not matter to her. In fact, she was relieved that she did not need to deal with the princess. The miracle that mankind used to conquer the sky touched down gently. The first ones to step down the stairs were the handsome young guards who wore red ceremonial uniforms with white trousers. Decorated with medals, they formed 2 lines with rifles in hands. They were awaiting the appearances of King George III, his queen, and the prince and princess. Audrey was not new to meeting important people, so she showed no interest at all. Instead, she had her attention on the 2 statue-like black-armored cavalry flanking the king. In this era of iron, steam, and cannons, it was surprising that there was still someone who could bear wearing full armor. The cold metallic luster and the dull black helmet conveyed solemnity and authority. Could they be the higher-order disciplinary paladins? Audrey recalled snippets of a casual conversation among adults. She was curious, but did not dare go close. The ceremony commenced with the arrival of the king's family. The incumbent prime minister, Lord Agassiz Nagin, went up to the front. He was a member of the Conservative Party and the second non-aristocrat to become the prime minister till this very day. He was given the title of a lord for his great contributions. Of course, Audrey knew more. The main supporter of the Conservative Party was the present Duke of Negan, Pallas Negan, who was the brother of Aguacid. Aguacid was a slender and almost bald 50-plus-year-old man with a sharp gaze. He surveyed the area before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have witnessed this history. Making ironclad warship, it has dimensions of 101 by 21 meters. It has an amazing port and starboard design. The armor belt is 457 millimeters thick. The displacement is 10,060 tons. There are 4 305 millimeter main cannons, 6 rapid-fire cannons, 12 6-pound cannons, 18 barrel machine guns, and 4 torpedo launchers. It can reach a speed of 16 knots. It will be the real hegemon. It will conquer the seas. The crowd was roused. The mere descriptions were enough to instill fearful images in them, let alone the fact that the actual thing was right in front of them. Aguacid smiled and spoke a few more lines before saluting the king and requested, "Your Majesty, please give it a name. Since it will set sail from Pritz Harbor, it should be named the Pritz George I.E., responded. His expression showed his delight. The Pritz, the Pritz. The words spread from the Navy Minister and the Admiral of the Royal Navy to all the soldiers and officers on the deck. They all exclaimed in unison, "The Pritz! George I.I. ordered the Pritz to set sail for a trial in the midst of the gun salutes and the celebratory atmosphere." Honk, thick smoke spewed out from the chimneys. The sound from the machinery could be heard faintly beneath the sound of the ship horn. The juggernaut departed from the harbor. Everyone was shocked when the 2 main cannons at the ship's bow fired at an uninhabited island in its path. Boom! Boom! The ground shook as dust shot up into the sky. Shock waves spread out, producing waves in the sea. Satisfied, Aguacid turned back to the crowd and announced, "From this day on, doomsday will fall on the 7 pirates who call themselves admirals and the 4 who call themselves king. They can only shiver in fear. It is the end of their era. Only the ironclad warship will roam the seas no matter whether the pirates have the powers of the Beyonders, ghost ships, or cursed ships." Aguacid's chief secretary deliberately asked, "Can't they build their own ironclad warships?" Some of the nobles and members of parliament nodded, feeling that such a possibility could not be eliminated. Aguacid immediately smiled and shook his head slowly as he answered, "Impossible! It will never be possible. Building our ironclad warship required 3 big coal and steel amalgamators, a scale of more than 20 steel factories, 60 scientists and senior engineers from the Backland Cannon Academy and Pritz Nautical Academy, 2 royal shippers, almost 100 strides, and died sairings." Having said that, he paused and raised his arms before shouting in agitation, "Ladies and gentlemen, the era of cannons and warships has dawned upon us." Chapter 9. The notebook after half an hour of rest, Zoomin grew, who now viewed himself as Klein, finally recovered. In the meantime, he found that there were now 4 black dots on the back of his hand, which happened to form a small square. These 4 black spots faded and disappeared quickly, but Klein knew that they were still hiding in his body, waiting to be awakened. 4 spots forming a square? Is it in correspondence with the 4 pieces of staple food at the 4 corners of the room? Does this mean that in the future, I don't need to prepare the food and can do the ritual and chants immediately? Klein made a guess. This might seem good, but the emergence of the spots was ominous, and things that one lacked understanding of were always scary. The fact that those inexplicable Chinese divinations from Earth could produce effects here, the strange transmigration in his sleep, the mysterious murmurings that almost drove him crazy during the ritual, and the mysterious and trippy gray world whose significance he had no idea of made Klein shiver in the hot weather of June. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest fear is the fear of the unknown. He recalled this saying as he was experiencing the fear of the unknown acutely. There was in him an unprecedented and irresistible urge to make contact with the mysterious domain, to learn more, and to explore the unknown. There was also a contradicting escape mentality within him compelling him to pretend nothing had happened. Intense sunlight shone through the window onto the desk. It was as if there were grains of gold sprinkled on the desk. Klein gazed at the desk, feeling as though he had come into contact with warmth and hope. He relaxed slightly, and a strong sense of fatigue washed over him. His eyelids were as heavy as lead as they kept closing themselves. It must have been the combined effect of the sleepless night and the tiring encounter. Klein shook his head and pushed himself up with the aid of the desk. He stumbled towards the double-decked bed, completely disregarding the rye bread placed at the four corners of the room. He fell asleep immediately after he lay down. Groan, groan. Klein was woken up by hunger pangs. When he opened his eyes, he felt rejuvenated. There's still a slight headache. He rubbed his temples and sat up. He was so hungry that he could eat a horse. He returned to the desk while straightening his shirt. He picked up the silver vine leaf pocket watch. Pa? The pocket watch's lid sprang open and the second hand was ticking. 12:30. I slept for 3 hours. Klein put the pocket watch back into his linen shirt pocket, in while swallowing. In the northern continent, there were 24 hours in a day, 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute. Whether each second passed at the same rate here compared to Earth was unknown to Klein. At this moment, he could not even think of terms such as mysticism, rituals, or the grayish worlds. His mind was occupied by one thing: food. He would leave the thinking to after his meals. Only then could he work. Klein picked up the loaves of rye bread from the four corners and wiped off the minute specks of dust on it, without any hesitation. He planned on making one of them his lunch. He decided to dig into the offerings because he only had 5 pence with him, and there was a tradition of eating the offerings back in his hometown. After all, there was not any observable change to the bread. It was better to be frugal. Of course, the memory and habits left behind by the original Klein had also played a role. It was a huge waste to use the expensive gas only to light up the room. So Klein took out a furnace and boiled water with it after adding some coal. He paced around as he waited. Anyone would choke eating those loaves of rye bread without water? Yikes. Life with meat only for dinner is going to be dreadful. No, wait, this is already an exception. Melissa would only allow our meals to have meat twice a week, if not for my upcoming interview, Klein thought, as he looked around, hungry. He had nothing better to do. His eyes seemed to turn avaricious when he set his eyes on the pound of mutton in the cupboard. No, I need to wait for Melissa to eat it together, Klein thought, as he shook his head and rejected the idea of cooking half of it right now. Although he often ate outside, he had still developed some basic culinary skills, owing to his living in a big city alone. His dishes were not delicious, but they were at least edible. Klein turned his body around so that the mutton would not seduce him. Then he suddenly realized that he had also bought peas and potatoes in the morning. Potatoes. Klein immediately had an idea. He quickly turned back to the cupboard and took out 2 potatoes from a tiny pile of them. He first cleaned the potatoes in the public bathroom and then added them into a pot so they were boiled together with the water. After a while, he sprinkled into the water some yellow coarse salt from the spices container he found inside the cupboard. He waited patiently for a few minutes before lifting the pot and pouring the soup into a few cups and a bowl. He took out the potatoes with a fork and placed them on the desk at the end. Uff, uff. He blew at the potato as he peeled it bit by bit. The fragrance of boiled potato diffused through the air. It smelled very appetizing. He salivated crazily. The heat could not deter him any longer. Klein took a bite despite having the potato only half peeled. How fragrant. It had a powdery texture and tasted sweet as he chewed. He was instantly filled with emotions, and he wolfed down the 2 potatoes. He even ate some of the skin. Then, he held up the bowl and enjoyed the soup. The pinch of salt and water proved to be thirst-quenching. I really enjoyed eating potatoes this way when I was young, a filled Klein exclaimed in his head. Meanwhile, he tore off a small piece of bread and dipped it into the soup to eat it softened. Perhaps the ritual was too tiring. Klein ate 2 loaves of bread, which amounted to a whole pound. Klein felt he was finally rejuvenated. He enjoyed the joy of life after he drank the soup before tidying up. Then, he took in the lustrous sunshine happily. He sat back at the desk and began planning. I can't escape. I must think of a way to come into contact with mysticism and become a beyonder, as mentioned by Justice and the Hanged Man. I need to overcome the fear of the unknown. The only way now is to wait for the next gathering. I need to try listen for the formula of the Spectator's Potion or other things related to mysticism. There are 4 more days before Monday. Before that, I need to first figure out the problem with Klein. Why did he commit suicide? What happened to him? Unable to transmigrate back and wash his hands of everything, Klein picked up the notebook that lay on the table. He wanted to find hints that could help him regain his lost memory fragments. The original Klein obviously had the habit of taking notes. He also liked to write diaries. Klein was fully aware that the cabinet that supported the desk on the right stored a whole stack of completed notebooks. the book he had began on the 10th of May. Matters regarding his school and mentor, as well as content pertaining to knowledge, were at the beginning. 12th May, Mr. Azik mentioned that the common language used by the Balam Empire in the southern continent also developed from ancient Fezak, a branch of Jotun. Why is this so? Does this mean that every sentient living being once spoke the same language? No, there has to be a mistake. According to the revelation of Evernight and the Book of Storms, giants were not the only hegemons of the world in primordial times. There were also elves, mutants, and dragons. Anyways, these are just myths and fantasies. At the 16th May, the senior associate Professor Cohen and Mr. Azik discussed the inevitability of the Age of Steam. Mr. Azik opined that it was just a coincidence, because if it wasn't for Emperor Roselle, the northern continent would still be wielding swords like the southern continent. Mentor argued that Mr. Azik had placed too much emphasis on the contribution of an individual. He believes that with progress, even if there wasn't an Emperor Roselle, there would be an Emperor Robert. Therefore, the Age of Steam might come late, but eventually come nevertheless. I found little meaning in their discussion. I prefer discovering new things and unraveling the hidden pasts. Perhaps I am more suited to study archaeology than history. 29th May. Welch found me and told me that he had acquired a notebook from the Fourth Epoch. Oh my goddess, a notebook from the Fourth Epoch? He didn't want to ask the archaeology department students for help, so he came to Naya and me to help him decode the content. How could I refuse? Of course, I can only do it after my graduation defense. I can't afford diverting my attention at this stage. This caught Klein's attention. Compared to the notes about history and viewpoint disagreements, the appearance of a notebook from the Fourth Epoch might have led to Klein's suicide. The Fourth Epoch was the epoch before the present Iron Age. Its history was mysterious and incomplete. Due to the fact that very few tombs, ancient cities, and records had been found, archaeologists and historians could only refer to the ambiguous records provided by the 7 major churches that centered around their religious teachings to roughly form their original picture. They knew the existence of the Solomon Empire, the Tudor dynasty, and the Trunsoist Empire. Having set his sights on solving the mystery and restoring history, Klein didn't have much interest in the first 3 eras, whose roots were closer to legends. He was more interested in the Fourth Epoch, also known as the Age of the Gods. Klein was concerned for his future career and thus focused on the interview, but it was all futile. Klein could not resist exclaiming. Universities were still very scarce, and the majority of students were either from noble or wealthy families. As long as he did not have an extreme mindset, a commoner who had been admitted into university would have been able to build precious social connections through group discussions and networking events despite the prejudice and exclusion from the entrenched social circles. The very generous Welch McGovern was an example. He was the son of a banker from Constant City, Mid-Seashire, Lowen Kingdom. He was used to asking Naya and Klein for help because they were always in the same group for work. Without thinking further, Klein continued reading the notebook. 18th June. I have graduated. Farewell, Coy University, 19th June. I have seen the notebook. By comparing sentence structures and root words, I discovered that it is a modified form of ancient Fezak. More precisely, over the course of its 1,000-year history, the Fezak language had changed constantly, a little at a time. 20th June. We have deciphered the contents of the first page. The author was a member of a family called Antigonus. 21st June. He mentioned the Dark Emperor. This is anachronistic with regards to the time this notebook is deduced to be written. Is Professor wrong? Is Arch Emperor a common title for every emperor of the Solomon Empire? 22nd June. The Antigonus family apparently had a very high standing in the Solomon Empire. The author mentions that he was making a secret transaction with a person named Tudor. Tudor. Is it related to the Tudor dynasty? 23rd June. I am trying to restrain myself from thinking about the notebook and going to Welch's place. I need to prepare for the interview. It's very important. 24th June. Naya tells me that they have found something new. I think I need to check it out. 25th June. From the new deciphered content, the author had accepted a mission to visit the nation of the Evernight situated at the summit of the highest peak of the Hornices mountain range. Oh my goddess, how can a nation exist at the summit of that peak which is over 6,000 meters above sea level? How do they survive? 26th June. Are these strange things real? The record ended at this point? Zoom and Grui transmigrated in the early hours of the 28th, which means to say that there was indeed an entry for June 27th. It's that line. Everyone will die, including me. Klein flipped to the page he first saw when he arrived, feeling goosebumps while he made the deduction. In order to solve the mystery of the original Klein's suicide, he thought that he should visit Welch and take a look at the ancient notebook. However, with a lot of experience from novels, movies, and TV drama series, he suspected that if they were really related, this visit would be very dangerous. Those who went investigating castles despite knowing that they were haunted served as a warning. However, he had to go since escaping would never solve the problem. It would only make things worse until it welled over and completely drowned him. Perhaps call the police? But claiming to have committed suicide would be silly, right? Knock, 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 knock. There was a series of quick and forceful knocks. Klein sat straight up and listened. Knock, knock. The knocks echoed through the empty hallway. Bye.